Hey Jack, I'm back, and with me, another speed art. This one is of Wolverine from the original X-Men film. Today I'm going to be ranking the entire X-Men franchise, which means the original 3-film trilogy, the prequel quadrilogy, Wolverine's trilogy, the New Mutants, and the Deadpool trilogy. So let's rank all 14 of these X-Men films from worst to first. Coming in last place is the film I watched for the first time with this rewatch of all the X-Men films, and that is The New Mutants. It's both a bad superhero movie and a bad horror movie, with a painfully uninteresting mystery at the center of it. This was a painful watch that commits the worst sin of any movie. It's just plain boring, and also not to spoil the ending, but a dream bear? Come on. It's like someone wanted to make a Nightmare on Elm Street superhero film, but the pieces don't mesh together well at all. I'd even say the Super Freddy scene from Part 5 is a more interesting take on a superhero Nightmare on Elm Street than this entire movie. Coming in unlucky 13th place is Dark Phoenix. This is a pretty big jump up from the last film, mostly because it isn't ever a boring slog, although it has its own problems. It's an okay X-Men movie with a lot of cool sequences, largely the space scene and the train sequence at the end, and the compound sequences with Magneto and Jean, but some other odd character choices and actors that are clearly phoning in their performances prevent it from reaching the series highs. Like, I get it, I know Jennifer Lawrence became a huge star between films, but it's like she didn't even try here and felt like she was better than the material. It is nice seeing the team in a more simple and colorful X uniform though, but it just doesn't come together fully as a film. In 12th is another one of the prequel films, X-Men Apocalypse. It's a serviceable action film that lacks the gravitas of the previous entries, but still some fun stuff is to be found, although Oscar Isaac is wasted in a pretty muted performance. But the parts with Magneto just trying to live his life and when he loses his family are nicely done, and the ending battle with all the X-Men teaming up is nice to see. Although the stakes are high, it doesn't ever feel like the world is ever really gonna end, but the suits in this one are actually pretty nice, including the suits they tease a little bit at the end, although they should have kept them for the sequel, and I don't know why they weren't. Coming in 11th is the first Wolverine solo film and the first and only X-Men origin film. There is some good stuff and some really bad stuff. The good include the opening and the montages, the bad include the pacing of the film and the use of Deadpool. Although it's still mostly a fun romp that tells Logan's story well enough, it's everything around that is a little off. Also, the man they got to play the younger Stryker is basically the same age as Brian Cox in the second film, and he looks nothing like him and is supposed to be like 30 years younger. It's a weird casting that always throws me off when I watch the series, but nonetheless, it's still worth a one-time watch at least. 10th place is the third in the original trilogy, The Last Stand. It's a lesser X-Men sequel that still brings some interesting concepts to the table. Largely the Angel subplot and the Mutant Cure subplot are the most interesting parts of the movie, but the main story, which tries to tell an abridged version of the Dark Phoenix storyline, is largely lacking. Still, it's nice to see the original trilogy cast still here, and the inclusion of characters like Kitty Pryde and Juggernaut are fun. Well, Juggernaut is a little weird, but he does get the film's most iconic line for better or worse. Plus we get Kelsey Grammer's Beast, which is a great inclusion, and Professor X's death scene in the movie is actually quite well done and pretty powerful. So all in all, this is a fun film that may not be perfect, but does do an okay job of wrapping up the original trilogy. In 9th is the second Wolverine solo film, The Wolverine. It's a good film that does Wolverine more justice than his origin film. The action is competently directed by James Mangold, and Hugh Jackman is at his most visceral as the character. It does feel like it slows down in pacing in the middle and third act though, but as for the ending where a certain character ends up being the Silver Samurai, which is different than the comic version, I actually kind of like the change and appreciate how it fits in nicely with the themes of life and death that the movie plays with. So overall, this is a good solo flick, and the Japanese setting feels like a fresh location for the X-Men universe. In 8th is the first Deadpool movie on this list, Deadpool 2. It's a good sequel that is louder and funnier than the first, although doesn't quite reach the heights of the original in terms of emotions, I feel. Cable is a great villain though, and Josh Brolin fits in nicely with the cast. The X-Force sequence is a highlight of this goofy sequel with many cameos and hilarious moments, and the themes of time and wanting to change the past help to hold the film together, despite not feeling as cohesive as the original. Ryan Reynolds was born to play this role, and I'm glad he's been able to give these movies his all. In lucky number 7 is X-Men First Class. It's a strong entry in the X-Men series that breaks canon in many ways from the previous films, but viewed as a one-off or reboot, it's quite spectacular. The film hinges on Magneto and Charles Xavier's relationship and opposing views that can be easily understood. The revenge that Magneto wants to exact on the man who ruined his life is at the heart of the film, which gives new context to the opening of the original movie. Although really it feels like a fun romp that takes inspiration from earlier James Bond films, and you can see why director Matthew Vaughn would go on to play in this wheelhouse later on. The casting for all the leads is on point. James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Kevin Bacon, and Jennifer Lawrence all bring their A game. The only miscast I think is Nicholas Hoult as Beast, mainly because he barely feels like Kelsey Grammer's take on the role later on, but this is a great prequel and well worth the watch. In sixth is the sequel to this film, X-Men Days of Future Past. This is a great action flick that combines the two X-Men timelines with the two biggest stars in the franchise, Jennifer Lawrence and Hugh Jackman, being the most important characters. This both works as a great team-up film for the X-Men, with future scenes showing a robot uprising and the X-Men in the last days of the battle, and the past scenes have Wolverine being sent back into his 1970s self to try to stop the uprising from ever happening, along with Charles Xavier and Magneto. Quicksilver also gets the best scene in the movie, and a scene they would try to redo in follow-ups to lesser returns. But really, this is just a great retcon to the timeline and helps to give Wolverine and the other X-Men a happy ending. Coming into the top 5 is Deadpool and Wolverine, a fun and exciting buddy comedy film that gives us the usual Deadpool treatment and teams him up throughout the film, with Wolverine being the classic straight man to the more zany Deadpool. Hugh and Ryan's chemistry makes for the best moments, and the cameos are fun for fans of the Fox universe and related movies. The story is a little weak compared to the previous films, but the comedy and inside references and jabs taken at the Fox universe and the MCU films help to make this an entertaining farce that is never boring and always easily entertaining. In fourth is X2, a great follow-up to the first X-Men movie, amps up the action and adds some fan-favorite characters like Nightcrawler, Lady Deathstrike, and Stryker. It lacks some of the magic of the first one, which has the benefit of being able to introduce the world through the eyes of Rogue and Wolverine, but is still a very worthy watch in the franchise, which I know most people put above the original. Although there's just a certain vibe to the first film which I find very cozy. This film also works well as a Wolverine origin film, as the plot seems to revolve around him and the man who experimented on him, so I never really got why we needed to revisit it all again in his origin, but oh well, X2 is still a great movie and well worth the watch. And rolling into the top 3? Well, first, leave a comment down below with your top 3 or your full ranking, I'd love to see it. But in third for me is the original Deadpool, a great action flick that balances comedy and has some heart that holds the film together. Crazy this film almost got cancelled and now it's one of the highest grossing R-rated films ever. This truly was a lightning in a bottle movie, and it's crazy that his appearance in Wolverine Origins almost killed this from happening. Colossus and Ellie are good pairs, but really Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool is truly what makes this film what it is, along with the raunchy comedy, bloody action, and classic origin story. In second is probably the most powerful film in the series, Logan. It's brutal with its action and storytelling and truly gives Hugh Jackman the swan song the character truly deserved. The inclusion of X-23 and Professor X on this road trip film works really well, and the darker take on the material and the first time seeing Wolverine with an R rating is absolutely fantastic. Hugh Jackman also gets to play the more feral X-24, which he faces off against in this film, and spoiler alert, but Wolverine's death scene at the end remains as poetic as it was on release, so I highly recommend you watch this film even if you're not into movies with a darker tone. But coming in first is the original X-Men from 2000. It's a great superhero flick that works both as an action romp and a metaphor for repressed members of the population. Some of the casting is truly iconic. Hugh as Wolverine, Patrick Stewart as Professor X, and Ian McKellen as Magneto. Sometimes things just work out nicely like that. It's crazy, that casting. The action is nicely directed as well, and for the most part, the effects still hold up pretty well after 24 years, minus a couple of early 2000s CGI moments. The story is pretty simple, but seems to be filled with a lot of backstory which permeates many of the scenes. So if you haven't seen the original film, I say check it out. It's still a lot of fun after all these years. So that is my ranking of the X-Men franchise. Leave your own ranking below, and if you haven't seen it, I have a new animation on the channel going through Wolverine's evolution, celebrating Hugh Jackman's 24-year run as the character. Also, thank you to Hunter Hottinger for joining the Patreon recently. Check out the Patreon to get early access to the animations, sneak peeks, illustrations, full-size infographics, and access to the actual animation models I create for the animations. So until next time, I've been Aaron, and I'll tell you something later.